Something is happening right now that almost nobody is connecting the dots on. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow channel through which 1/5 of the world's oil supply moves every single day, is effectively closed. Has been since late February of 2026. The United States and Israel went to war with Iran. Iran's supreme leader was assassinated. And in retaliation, Iran shut the door on the world's most important energy corridor. Oil is sitting stranded in the Persian Gulf. Tankers are turning back. Prices are through the roof. And the global economy is starting to feel the pressure in ways that haven't been seen since the 1970s oil shocks. But here's what nobody is talking about. Deep inside this crisis, buried under the headlines about missiles and blockades and ceasefire talks, a financial setup is quietly being constructed. A setup that could trigger one of the most significant currency events in modern history. And it runs directly through Iraq. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to see a chain of events, verified, documented, happening right now that connects the Hormuz crisis to a US-backed change of government in Baghdad, to the world's largest untapped oil fields, to the survival of the US dollar itself, and yeah, to the Iraqi dinar. Let's go. Let's start with what we know for certain. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes on Iran, targeting military facilities, nuclear sites, and leadership. In the process, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. Iran's response was immediate and overwhelming. Missile barrages on Israeli cities, drone strikes on US military bases across the Gulf, in the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain. And then the move that shook global markets to their core, shut the Strait of Hormuz. Not a threat, not a warning. They actually closed it. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps broadcast warnings across all maritime frequencies. No ship is allowed to pass the Strait of Hormuz. They boarded vessels. They attacked tankers. They laid sea mines across the narrowest point of the channel, a stretch just 24 miles wide at its tightest point. Shipping firms suspended operations overnight. Before this war, approximately 3,000 vessels per month transited the strait. Oil tankers alone were carrying 15 million barrels per day through that corridor. That's roughly 1/5 of the entire world's seaborne oil trade. By March, that number had collapsed to 154 vessels for the entire month. That's about 5% of normal traffic. The International Energy Agency called it, and I'm quoting directly here, the largest oil supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Bigger than the 1973 Arab oil embargo. Bigger than the Gulf War. The biggest ever. Brent crude surged past $120 a barrel. Gas prices in the United States hit $4 a gallon. Gulf states that depend on the strait for over 80% of their food imports started facing grocery shortages. And it isn't over. As of right now, the US has launched a counter-blockade on Iranian ports. Iran responded by retaking control of the strait. There's a fragile ceasefire in place, but shipping companies remain terrified. War risk insurance for a single transit could cost over $1 million per ship. Industry experts, including the CEO of Baker Hughes, are saying the strait may not fully reopen until the second half of 2026 at the earliest. Some surveys of oil executives put that number even later. The world is in an energy crisis. And the clock is ticking. Now here's where it gets interesting. When Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, they didn't just hurt their enemies. They hurt their friends too. Iraq, a country with close ties to Iran, whose Iran-aligned political factions have dominated Baghdad's government for years, depends on that strait for nearly all of its oil exports. And oil is not a minor part of Iraq's economy. Oil is 90% of Iraq's GDP. So when the strait closed, Iraq's economy didn't slow down. It collapsed. Southern Iraq's oil production dropped by more than 70%. The Zubair oil field, one of the country's biggest, producing around 400,000 barrels a day, fell to less than half that output. The Rumaila field, one of the largest in the world, started shutting down operations because there was nowhere to send the oil. Government salaries went unpaid. Protests erupted in Basra, Iraq's oil heartland. The military grew restless. But here's the thing about crises. They also create opportunities. Because Iraq is not just any country. Iraq sits on top of the 5th largest proven oil reserves on the planet with over 140 billion barrels. And unlike Saudi Arabia or the UAE, Iraq has alternative export routes that don't go anywhere near the Strait of Hormuz. There's the Iraq-Turkey pipeline, a nearly 600-mile corridor running through the Kurdistan region up to the Turkish port of Ceyhan on the Mediterranean. Capacity, 1.6 million barrels per day. It had been sitting largely idle due to political disputes between Baghdad and the Kurdish regional government. There are long-discussed pipeline projects to Jordan, to Oman, to Egypt, bypasses that would give Iraq direct access to the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, completely circumventing the Persian Gulf entirely. Iraq, in other words, is sitting on the solution to the world's most urgent energy crisis. The problem? Getting to that solution requires something that Iraq has never quite managed to achieve: a functioning US-aligned government. Let me tell you what just happened in Baghdad over the last few weeks, because this is where the geopolitical chess match becomes visible. Iraq held parliamentary elections in November 2025. For months after, the country's dominant Shia political bloc, called the Coordination Framework, a coalition of Iran-aligned parties controlling about 185 of 329 parliamentary seats, couldn't agree on a prime minister. Their frontrunner was Nouri al-Maliki, a two-time former prime minister, one of the most powerful and divisive politicians in Iraq's modern history, and critically, a man with deep documented ties to Iran. The United States had a problem with that, not a quiet behind-the-scenes problem. A very public, very loud problem. Donald Trump personally intervened. He publicly stated his opposition to al-Maliki. He threatened to cut off all U.S. support to Iraq if al-Maliki was appointed. He warned that America's financial relationship with Iraq, including Iraq's access to its own oil revenues held at the New York Federal Reserve, would be on the table. Think about that for a moment. Iraq keeps its dollar reserves in the New York Fed. The U.S. controls the spigot on Iraq's own money. Al-Maliki was defiant at first, but then quietly he withdrew. And then something remarkable happened. On April 27, 2026, just days ago, Iraq's Coordination Framework nominated a completely different figure. A 40-year-old businessman and banker named Ali al-Zaidi, a political outsider, someone who had never held political office, a technocrat with degrees in law, finance, and banking, who owns a media company, a hypermarket chain, a university, and multiple investment conglomerates. No direct ties to Iran, no history in the political swamp. An economic mind in a country that desperately needs one. Iraq's president formally tasked him with forming a government the same day, and then Trump called him. April 30th. Trump phones al-Zaidi directly, congratulates him, invites him to the White House once a government is formed. And then, and this is the quote that matters, Trump told reporters, "With our help, he won, and we want him to do very well. And I told him that the United States is with him all the way. With our help, he won." The U.S. ambassador to Turkey, Tom Barrack, who also serves as special envoy to the region, had spoken to Zaidi before Trump even called. The very next day, May 2nd, Zaidi flew to Erbil, the capital of the Kurdistan region, and was received by Kurdistan region Prime Minister Masroor Barzani. The Kurdistan region controls the pipeline to Turkey. That's the bypass route. That's the solution. Zaidi is already working it, and the United States has made clear that it is watching every single cabinet appointment Zaidi makes. No Iran-linked figures in oil, defense, or finance. The U.S. has explicitly told Iraqi officials that no terrorist-designated entities connected to Iran can be included in the next government. This is not a suggestion. This is a condition. What we just witnessed in the space of a few weeks is the United States effectively engineering a political transition in one of the world's most strategically vital oil states, using financial leverage rather than military force. The Iran-aligned government that blocked American interests in Baghdad for years? Gone. The pro-Iranian former prime minister who was next in line? Sidelined. In his place? A US-welcomed, economically minded technocrat who flew to Kurdistan on day 5 to start unlocking the pipeline. Now let's talk about who really wins when Iraq's oil flows freely again. Because the US government doesn't move like this without a commercial interest backing it up. Over the past several months, something significant has been quietly happening. American oil companies, which largely abandoned Iraq years ago, ceding the field to Chinese and Russian firms, have been flooding back. ExxonMobil signed a preliminary agreement to develop the Majnoon oil field, one of Iraq's largest and one of the biggest oil reservoirs on the planet, located near the Iranian border in southern Basra. Chevron signed an agreement for the Nasiriyah project, a field with an estimated 4.36 billion barrels of recoverable reserves. And then, in a move that tells you everything about the direction of U.S. policy, Chevron took over West Kurna 2 from Russia's Lukoil after U.S. Treasury sanctions forced the Russian company out. West Kurna 2 produces nearly 10% of Iraq's total oil output, or about 0.5% of global supply. One field. BP signed a deal for Kirkuk. Total Energies committed over $27 billion. BP committed $25 billion. And these aren't the same kinds of contracts that previously drove Western companies out of Iraq. These are fundamentally better deals, with larger profit shares and direct access to physical barrels of crude that the companies can trade themselves. That's an enormous commercial advantage. The U.S. ambassador said it plainly. American investment in Iraq creates new opportunities for growth, generating jobs, enhancing economic resilience, and advancing a future of mutual prosperity. What that translates to is this. The United States is methodically repositioning its energy companies at the heart of OPEC's second largest oil producer, right as the geopolitical crisis has made Iraq's alternative export routes the most valuable energy infrastructure on Earth. Zaidi, the new PM designate, is a banker and businessman. He understands exactly what these companies need: contract stability, security guarantees, and a government that doesn't siphon oil revenues into Iranian militia networks. That is precisely what a Zaidi government is designed to provide. And there's another dimension to this that goes beyond oil company profits. When Chevron took West Corner 2, Russia's Lukoil didn't just lose a contract. Russia lost strategic influence over a critical node of global energy supply. When ExxonMobil moves into Majnoon, China's previously dominant position in Iraqi oil, built over years of patient deal-making while the US was distracted, begins to erode. Iraq under Zaidi is becoming a front in the US-China competition. And the US is currently winning that front. Now, I want to talk about something that most people have never heard of, but that underpins everything about why the United States cares so intensely about what happens in Iraq and the Persian Gulf. It's called the petrodollar system. And it is, without exaggeration, the foundation of American economic power for the last 50 years. Here's how it works. In 1974, the United States struck a deal with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia agreed to price its oil exclusively in US dollar, and to invest its surplus oil revenues back into US Treasury bonds and dollar-denominated assets. In exchange, the US guaranteed Saudi Arabia's security. Over time, every OPEC member adopted the same arrangement, which meant that any country in the world that wanted to buy oil, and every country in the world needs oil, had to first acquire US dollars to do it. This creates an artificial permanent global demand for the dollar. It keeps the dollar strong. It allows the US government to borrow money at lower interest rates than it otherwise could. It gives Washington enormous leverage over the global financial system. Economists call it America's exorbitant privilege. And the entire system rests on one critical assumption, that the US can guarantee the safe flow of oil through the Persian Gulf. That assumption just broke. When Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, they didn't just disrupt oil supplies. They demonstrated that the US security guarantee, the foundational promise of the petrodollar deal, could be challenged, shattered, even temporarily. And here's the detail that should make every American's blood run cold. Iran has been allowing some ships to pass through the strait. Ships from countries it considers friendly. China, India, Pakistan. And some of those passages paid for in Chinese yuan. Deutsche Bank analysts put out a note warning that this could be a key catalyst for erosion in petrodollar dominance and the beginnings of the petro-yuan. Think about what that means. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has already fallen from 71% in 1999 to about 57% today, a 25-year low. The petro-yuan system, where oil is sold in yuan, is still tiny, maybe 5% of global trade. But Iran has just handed China a real-world proof of concept. If you pay in yuan, you get through the strait. That is a threat to the architecture of American economic power that no US president can ignore. So how does the US fight back? You can't bomb the petro-yuan. You can't sanction your way out of a reserve currency decline. What you can do is ensure that the world's most oil-rich, most strategically positioned alternative producer, a country sitting on 140 billion barrels of reserves with multiple non-Hormuz export routes, is locked into the dollar system. A US-aligned Iraq with a technocrat PM, American oil majors embedded in its key fields, oil revenues flowing through dollar-denominated contracts, and a central bank managing a dollar-pegged currency, is the United States building a dollar fortress in the heart of the Middle East. Iraq becomes the anchor that holds the petrodollar together at precisely the moment it is most vulnerable. A stronger Iraqi dinar, pegged to and managed against the dollar, means more Iraqi oil wealth sitting in dollar-denominated reserves. More Iraqi sovereign wealth recycled into US treasuries. More of the global oil system denominated in USD, not yuan. This is not about charity toward Iraq. This is about American monetary survival. Now, let's talk about the Iraqi dinar directly. Because I want to be straight with you here, as someone who has followed this story through all its layers, and give you the honest picture. Not the hype, not the doom. The actual picture. Where does the IQD stand right now? The official exchange rate is approximately 1,310 Iraqi dinars to $1 US. The 2026 federal budget locks in a rate of 1,300. The central bank has confirmed this rate is not changing for government accounting purposes in the near term. Before the wars and sanctions of the 1990s, Iraq operated with a much stronger currency. The dinar fell dramatically through decades of conflict, sanctions, and institutional collapse. What we have today at 1 to 300 plus reflects 30 years of economic devastation, not Iraq's actual resource base. Iraq has over 100 billion in foreign exchange reserves. It sits on 140 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. At 120 a barrel, which is the current war premium, Iraq's theoretical oil wealth is staggering. The problem has never been the oil. The problem has been the governance. Specifically, the network of Iran-aligned political factions and militias that have systematically looted Iraq's oil revenues, smuggled dollars out through black market operations, and kept the country's financial system dysfunctional for their own benefit. Those networks are now being dismantled. Here's how. First, the dollar smuggling crackdown. For years, Iran-aligned groups used Iraq's central bank dollar auction as a mechanism to funnel US dollars to sanctioned Iranian entities. Billions of dollars leaked out of Iraq's financial system this way. al-Zaidi government, with the US explicitly vetting the finance ministry, ends this. The Central Bank of Iraq has already been tightening its controls, reducing the dinar money supply, and narrowing the gap between official and parallel market rates. Second, the oil revenue surge. If Zaidi unlocks the Turkey pipeline to anywhere near its full 1.6 million barrel per day capacity and new pipeline routes to Jordan and Egypt come online, Iraq's oil revenues could multiply dramatically, even with Hormuz still closed. At 120 a barrel, that's a potential 190 million per day in additional revenue through non-Hormuz routes alone. That rebuilds foreign reserves at a speed not seen in Iraq's modern history. Third, the institutional upgrade. The US has told Zaidi that no Iran-linked figures can hold the oil, finance, or defense ministries. That means, for the first time in the post-2003 era, Iraq's key economic ministries could be run by competent technocrats with Western backing, IMF cooperation, and a mandate to actually fix things. Now, what does all of this mean for the dinar? A dramatic overnight revaluation, the kind some communities have been predicting for years, where 1,300 dinars suddenly becomes worth $1 at 1.1, that remains deeply speculative. That would require an entirely different monetary architecture. The central bank has given no signals of anything that radical in the near term. But a managed appreciation, a meaningful strengthening of the dinar over months, perhaps from 1,310 toward 1,000 or even stronger, that is now more plausible than at any point since 2003. The conditions that would need to exist for such a move have never all been present simultaneously. Until now. A US-backed PM. Iran-aligned money networks being dismantled. American oil majors locking in massive investment. Foreign reserves growing. Oil flowing through new routes. The IMF watching with interest. Washington coveting the finance ministry. These are not predictions. They are documented, present-tense realities. The trajectory points in one direction. Let me bring this all together. What we have is not a coincidence. It is not random. It is a strategic sequence, some of it planned, some of it forced by circumstances, that is unfolding in real time. It starts with Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz, the largest energy disruption in history. A crisis that threatens the global economy, exposes the weakness of the petrodollar system, and hands China a potential opening to reshape global oil trade in yuan. The US can't reopen Hormuz quickly. Mines take months to clear. Iran still has asymmetric capabilities. A ceasefire is fragile. The strait may not fully function again until late 2026 or beyond, so Washington pivots. It turns its attention to Iraq, the country with the alternative routes, the massive reserves, and the potential to offset Hormuz if the political gridlock can be broken. But Iraq's government, dominated by Iran-aligned factions, is the obstacle. So the US applies the one tool that Iraq cannot resist: financial leverage. Iraq's oil revenues clear through the New York Federal Reserve. Trump threatens to cut the lifeline if the wrong man becomes PM al-Maliki, the pro-Iran frontrunner, stands down. In his place emerges Ali al-Zaidi, a 40-year-old banker and businessman with no political baggage, no Iran ties, and an economic mindset perfectly suited to what Washington needs. Trump calls him personally, invites him to the White House, publicly claims credit for his selection. With our help, he won. Zaidi's first move? Fly to Kurdistan and start negotiating the Turkey pipeline deal. Meanwhile, ExxonMobil, Chevron, and BP are already in position, having signed preliminary agreements in the months before the war, now ready to scale up dramatically under a friendly government. The Iran-linked dollar smuggling networks that have bled Iraq's finances for years face a US-supervised finance ministry that will shut them down. Iraq's oil revenues rebuild its foreign reserves. The central bank gains the cushion it needs. A managed dinar appreciation becomes not just possible, but strategically desirable. A stronger IQD tied to the dollar means more Iraqi oil wealth denominated in dollars. More demand for US treasuries. More ammunition against the petroleum. And sitting underneath all of this, holding 140 billion barrels of oil that the world desperately needs, Iraq becomes the most strategically important country on earth for the next 12 to 24 months. Not Saudi Arabia. Not Russia. Iraq. The country that the United States invaded in 2003, supposedly to find weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist, may be on the verge of becoming exactly what the US always needed it to be: a stable, oil-rich, dollar-aligned partner at the heart of the Middle East. 23 years later, after trillions of dollars and thousands of lives, the Hormuz crisis may have accomplished in weeks what 2 decades of military occupation couldn't. Whether that makes you feel hopeful or cynical or both at once is probably the right reaction. So where do we go from here? What are the signals you should be watching? Signal 1, Zaidi's cabinet. He has 30 days from April 27th to present his full cabinet to Parliament. Watch who gets oil, finance, and defense. If those ministries go to genuine technocrats, people with professional credentials, no militia ties, and Western relationships, the playbook is on track. If Iran-linked figures sneak in, Washington will push back hard and the timeline slows. Signal 2, the Kurdistan pipeline. Zaidi is already in Erbil. Watch for announcements on expanding the Iraq-Turkey pipeline throughput beyond its current 170,000 barrels per day toward its full capacity of 1.6 million. That's the first major proof that the energy bypass is real. Signal 3, the dollar auction. The Central Bank of Iraq runs a daily dollar auction. Watch the spread between the official rate and the parallel street market rate. If that spread narrows consistently, meaning less dollar leakage and fewer black market operations, the financial cleanup is working. Signal 4, foreign reserve data. Iraq's central bank publishes foreign reserve figures. If reserves climb meaningfully from their current 100 billion plus baseline, that's the cushion building for any future exchange rate adjustment. Signal 5, U.S. oil company activity. Watch for Chevron and ExxonMobil moving from preliminary agreements to full contracts. Watch for capital expenditure announcements, hiring, and infrastructure spending in Iraq. That's money committing, not just letters of intent. Signal 6, IMF engagement. If the IMF begins formal discussions with Zaidi's government about monetary reform or exchange rate adjustment, that's a significant tell. The IMF doesn't talk about revaluing currencies in countries where it isn't planning to help engineer one. None of these signals alone closes the case. But collectively, if they all start flashing green over the next 60 to 90 days, you will have confirmation that the architecture described in this video is being built exactly as outlined. Let me leave you with this. The Iraqi Dinar revaluation has been discussed, speculated about, and hyped for over 20 years. For most of that time, the fundamentals simply weren't there. The politics were broken. The money was being looted. The government was captured by Iranian interest. The oil routes were blocked. What's different now is not a rumor. It's not a guru prediction. It's not a secret date or a hidden banking protocol. What's different now is a convergence of verified real-world events, a geopolitical crisis, a strategic U.S. intervention, a technocratic political transition, a commercial oil land grab by American majors, and an existential threat to the petrodollar system that has created conditions that have never existed before. The Hormuz crisis didn't just disrupt oil. It may have forced the hand of every player in this game simultaneously: Iran, the US, Iraq, China, the Gulf states, in a way that makes the next 12 months genuinely unlike anything we have seen in the post-2003 era. Whether that leads to an IQD revaluation, a modest appreciation, or something else entirely, I won't pretend to know the exact outcome. Nobody does. But I will tell you this with confidence: the dots have never been this connected. The players have never been this aligned. And the stakes have never been this high. Watch Baghdad, watch the pipeline, watch the central bank, and stay informed. If this video gave you a new way of looking at what's happening in the Middle East right now, share it. Because this story is bigger than most people realize, and it's moving fast. I'll be updating this as developments unfold. Until next time.